Hey guys, welcome to the Tetra Health and Performance Podcast. Today we've been waiting to do this one. This has been going to be a fun one. We're going to chat to Jess Spendlove, fantastic dietitian that we've had interactions with in the past and really found lots of benefit from. So really excited to dive in and find a bit of this information and share it with you guys. But first, before we get into this, guys, you know what to do: like, subscribe, engage, share this stuff out with other friends, family members, loved ones, because this stuff can be super helpful and super beneficial. Jess, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Mate, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about your background?
Thanks for having me, boys. It's great to reconnect and chat all things performance nutrition, which I love. My background, so spent a decade working in professional sport, most codes, AFL, NRL, football. Probably the easier thing to say is everything but cricket. Nothing, nothing against cricket, just didn't happen. And my love for performance nutrition really came from me being an active, high performing adolescent who wasn't nailing their nutrition. I was training a lot and I was fatigued and injured, and it wasn't because I was deliberately restricting, it was just I couldn't grasp how much I needed to eat for training 4 times a day. So fast forward to today, and I guess that 25-year window is really about the message that I'm trying to push to the greater population, to anyone I call a high performer, which for me, that just means a motivated person looking to kind of level up and be their best self. And that's kind of the work I'm doing today in the private sector. So that's it in a nutshell.
Nice. And that's fantastic. For anyone that's kind of motivated, want to level their stuff up, what are some of these basic principles that you find yourself echoing and the first levels for people to start addressing?
Yeah, there's probably 6 or 7 big rocks that I talk to everyone about, and that was probably like when the penny dropped for me, a few years into working with, 5, 6 different codes at the one time. I was like, I'm talking to these professional athletes about the same thing, and then when I was doing corporate presentations or school presentations, it was the same thing. So, a few of them are looking at fueling for the work that you're going to do. So, from a performance training point of view, that's thinking about if I'm training for performance, having fuel on board for before the session. But for me, that also means, for the corporate person or if someone trains in the afternoon, it's also setting your day up and fueling for your work. So that physical and mental cognition. So the physical and mental performance. The second one is looking at that protein distribution. And for me, I'll let you guys in on a secret. Like, that's probably the first place I start with everyone. And that's for a few reasons. One, no one's nailing it. Two, I know that they're going to get a big impact, like a short-term win. And I'm not about quick fixes, but I want big impact in the short term so we can build habits and start to, move the needle even further in the long term. So, protein consistency really is about looking at that distribution of your animal or your plant products. So there's 3 main groups: your dairy, anything that comes from an animal, meat, chicken, fish, eggs, and then our plant sources, so our soy, lentils, legumes. So it's looking at how that's distributed across the day. And we know most people don't get enough at breakfast and it's snacks. So it's just about, having a little bit more there. For adults, I kind of give a range of 15 to 20 grams. So, at breakfast, if you're a coffee and an out the door person, can we add a yogurt pouch to that? Or do you have time to make a smoothie? Snacks, if you're not snacking or just having a muesli bar or a piece of fruit, again, there it's thinking about what can I add to that to get that distribution. And the beautiful thing about that is if you're training, there's benefits to recovery and gaining lean mass, but for every single human, that's going to help with your energy levels across the day. You're going to be more satisfied, which means you're going to be more consistent with your intake rather than these peaks and troughs. And when there's that nice distribution with our intake, that flows on to our energy, our productivity, our focus. So it really does speak to this kind of high performance life. And 2 more I might rattle off, which are definitely relevant for everyone. One is add some color to your meals. So if you're looking at your meal or snack and it's brown or white, it's not complete, guys. We need some color. I don't care if it's green, red, purple, yellow, orange, ideally all the above. But if it's brown and white, cereal and milk, toast and eggs, steak and rice, let's get some color on there. And that's about nourishing you and boosting up those micronutrients and feeding your gut health and your gut bugs. And that really plays a big role in your mood and how you feel. And the last one I'll touch on is hydration. Low hanging fruit. A lot of people, 70% or more are getting around dehydrated. WHO has released a position statement saying that 70% of daytime fatigue is attributed to dehydration. More than 50% of our bodies are made up of water or our hydration levels. 70% of our brain. So when you just start to think that as we're sitting here, 50% or more of us should be made up of water. And when we think about, okay, well, how much are we actually drinking across the day? It really starts to paint a picture on how significant it can be from that physical and mental performance point of view. So, in a training sense, it'll reduce impact, it'll reduce power output and reaction time. And then from a day-to-day, just quality of life point of view, we'll feel more fatigued. Again, that focus, that productivity will really be impacted. So there's 4 to get you going.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like, just going back to one thing, because we find the same issue all the time. It's always coming down to protein. And sometimes when you just ask people, like, what do you eat throughout the day? It's so obvious that protein is missing in like that. Say, for example, people eat different amount of meals. Some people have 2, 3, or 4 meals. But no matter what, it's always very noticeable that they're missing protein in 1 or 2 of the meals or most of the meals. But then dinner seems to be the time where they go towards protein. And breakfast being the time where nearly nobody has protein in their meal. Do you have any understanding of why this might be the issue with most people? Have you thought about it much?
Yeah, I think when they've Western world, if we think about how we grew up, the culture, it really is cereal and milk or a piece of toast. And look, milk is dairy, or if you choose dairy, or even if you're using soy, or dairy and soy are high in protein. Your other plant milks are not, but the amount people use are generally a little bit. When we start to kind of look at that 15 to 20 gram minimum amount, again, referencing that glass of soy milk or cow's milk, that's 1.5 glasses. People aren't having that. So I guess it's traditional what we've grown up with. And then the other side is, a lot of people just are generally not great at breakfast. Again, it's that habit, what they've grown up with. So when we then start to try and increase breakfast, it can be really challenging for people. But, I invest and spend so much time working on people with that, and it's about finding their why. So you'll probably get the classic, I'm not hungry, I feel sick, whatever it might be, but it's then listening to what they want to change. And generally it can probably be categorized into one of a few things. One, they crash and burn in the afternoon. 2, they crave sweet foods every single day and they want to kind of eat better. 3, they are having these large portions at night. Maybe it's impacting their sleep. So all of those things are a result of what someone is or isn't doing at the start of the day. So first thing is that education piece. But then the second point is, I know we were talking before about this, it is that approach of progress over perfection. So if someone's not eating breakfast, I'm not saying go and have 3 eggs with some smoked salmon and avocado and vegetables on sourdough. It might be, okay, can we start with a yogurt pouch? Can we start, what are they open to starting with? And I guess it's my job and, your job to know, okay, these are the protein foods, and give the person the option to choose from. It's not you have to have eggs, you have to have yogurt, you have to have milk. There's a plethora of options, and it's kind of like, which one are you open to trying? Which one's going to work for you? And I really love the grab and go things, because it's kind of like, it doesn't mean you have to roll out of bed, sit down, have breakfast. It might be, can you literally pack something in your bag to have when you get to school or when you get to work? So, I'm big on habit formation. If anything, that's like I shift my whole philosophy to trying to teach people how to build habits. And I think that's the trump card when it comes to the quick wins and the detoxes and all of that stuff, which, it's the end of the year. That's all about to ramp up in the new year, no doubt. But they don't work because they're too strict. They're too much of a change. They're a quick fix which doesn't actually solve or create a sustainable routine. Whereas if we try and hack someone's behavior, change 1 or 2 things, sustainable things, focus on that and create that habit. You know, I think the trump card to the quick wins is like, well, imagine if you did this intentionally for a few weeks or so, and then it became a habit. Amazing. And you didn't even have to think about it.
I love that you mentioned energy, and I love that you mentioned like finding out like things about people that they're going to normally tell you, and then looking at food and being like, well, food can be the solution to this. Because I think too often people go to food for maybe just one thing. They don't really always go to food to increase their energy or get better night's sleep or like control cravings and stuff like that. They normally go to food for one reason. That's normally like weight loss, correct? Like most people that you deal with, there's obviously a few people in the know that do look into it a little bit more for other, like for them kind of reasons. But I love that you say that, like when someone is low on energy, like how it could be that source of protein in the morning and maybe changing what you're having for breakfast, because we know like these kind of like things like cereals and toasts when not aren't already a full meal, where they really are just carbohydrates, and that is going to have detriments to people's energy. And I think of all the things that are worth more money in the world, I think energy and being one of the most important things ever. I think very rarely do people actually talk about nutrition as building energy, even though we know it can. And it's just funny how it's just not there anymore.
It's
On that
crazy,
habit-based,
isn't it?
pardon me, on that habit-based effort, I like what you said, Jess. Like, you're just trying to level them up slightly. I think a big effort there is you only level them up again when it's sustainable and you can keep playing it into your lifestyle for a couple of weeks and it becomes just natural to you. And then we level it up again. I love that analogy of like, if we want to change like a cruise ship's direction, it's 1 degree at a time before it can do a full U-turn and go backwards. If we try and put the handbrake and do a 180, it ain't going to happen. That boat's going to tip over. So those perfectionists out there that want to do that all or nothing mentality, it's generally very short term and it's unsustainable. And that very slow habit-based approach is slowly turning that cruise ship in the right direction. It might take a bit longer to see those impactful results, but you will get there and you're turning for a long-term, a lifestyle change that's going to be with you for the rest of your life.
100%. And the thing I tell people when they come and see me, it's generally for like an objective measure. They want to achieve a certain thing. They want to get faster at something. They want to change their body composition. These are all things that, you know, tangible things that we can measure. And I'm like, the roadmap or the green light or the green flag that you're on the right track is how you feel each day. And then that's the thing they actually stay for, the quality of life. It's like they come for the tangible goal, few months, few years in the making type thing. But the reason they stay is when they actually start to feel the difference. And look, you know, this isn't a linear process. This isn't always every week we add a new thing. Like for some people, it's one at a time. Other people can handle a couple of things. It really depends on the complexity and, you know, someone's lifestyle and the environment. And there's so many factors. But also, half the time as well, it's saying to the person, okay, we need to go into a consolidation phase. We've just added 3 things. Life's hitting the fan for whatever reason. We don't need to push right now. We actually need to just consolidate. And, you know, we're humans. We might have weeks where we're busy, we're a bit less organized, we haven't done the groceries, old habits creep in. And I actually kind of like I say these are great weeks because you will then default because you're human, but then you will see and feel the difference from what you've changed. And that's when it really cements what you've done and how you feel. And it's pretty easy to get back on track when they've made that connection. So I really think my role is like creating self-awareness until they've got it, and then they've got it. And it's just making sure that they've got plan A, B, C, D, and E so that they can execute that one thing no matter what's going on.
Yeah, and you mentioned it not being linear, and I think that's the hardest thing for people to get their head around. Mitch mentioning perfectionists. Well, like most people come in with this kind of like, this is what I want, this is how you got to get it, and they picture just this linear straight line of, and this is everything. This is not just nutrition. This is training. This is being successful in life. It's always there's going to be failures. There's going to be setbacks. Things are going to knock you back. And I think like for yourself, like as a coach, you can kind of educate people before that happens. Like, hey, this isn't the worst thing. These will happen. Like, be prepared. But when it happens, we'll figure it out together, and we'll make adjustments along the way. And it's not the end of the world. Like it's one day or one meal or whatever. And I feel like people need to hear that so much more.
Exactly. Sometimes I feel, and maybe it's the type of clientele I specifically work with, but sometimes I'm more the voice of reason. I'm the one that's like, we need to halt, we need to slow down, we actually need to add in like a takeaway once a week, because we've nearly swung too far the other way. So, probably the thing that I love hearing the most from working with people is they can't believe how easy it is. And I'm like, it is. Like, this is why it's not download a meal plan from the internet. This is why it's, working with, I do like premium coaching now with athletes, business leaders, but I'm also bringing out online programs. So this information is available and more accessible to people, because I've kind of, I've managed to invest 25 years of my life working this out. And now it is about just rolling that out and spreading that message. And I think that's the thing. Like, and I don't say easy, because I know nutrition can be an area and really like challenging for people, but it's not about it consuming your life, being in your life. It's about looking at your life, having the tips, tools, and frameworks, and implementing it for yourself. As you said, consistency beats intensity. And, I think people get it in terms of like superannuation, like, whereas, money, 10%, it's cruising along, and then, 30 years down the track, it's really increasing. Like, it's not about a 30-year process. I mean, yes, nutrition is about supporting your best life, but it is kind of the same thing, that compounding effect, which might be weeks, months, years, but it really does start to add up as you kind of consistently do that.
Fantastic. And this is things that we teach people all the time, like with training. It's like, it's the long-term approach, maybe not the 30-year approach, because I don't think many people will buy into that for too much, but it is that long-term approach, and we got to hit the bumps as we go. Off that, you mentioned colors, like adding colors into your meal. And do you have any reasons why you'd add colors into your meal, and also like any tips and tricks for adding color into your meal?
Yeah, not less than 10% of Australians, adults, and less than 5% of Australian children are eating adequate amounts of fruits and vegetables. When we think about like long-term health, gut health, plants are the main like types of foods, which fruits and veggies are 2 of the 6. The other ones are like your whole grains, nuts and seeds, lentils and legumes, basically anything that's grown. And there's what we're finding more in this gut health space, which is really seem like it's the influence on everything. It's the influence on short-term health, long-term health, mental health, inflammatory conditions. But, they've been able to do some really cool research and kind of quantify a number, which is people who eat 30 or more plants a week have better gut microbiome, and then the correlated health and well-being outcomes compared to someone with 10. So, in the short term, it's fruits and veggies give more fiber. They give, an abundance of micronutrients. So like your different colors are not just like, oh, this fruit's red and that one's green. It's actually a reflection of the different micronutrients and antioxidants. So, it's a lot easier to say, or eat a variety of colors than break it down and go, oh, you need to get anthocyanins to recover, and you get them in your red and purple fruits and veggies. So, for me, low-hanging fruit, because so many people are not getting it right. It has so many, you eat a big bowl of veggies when you've been overseas and you just feel instantly better. Like, you think about that mood elevation, like it's kind of, again, that compounding effect on the day-to-day. And it's also providing your body with a lot of micro nutrients, which, not like unlike your fats, proteins and carbohydrates have an energy value, and they actually provide us with energy and a role. Micronutrients don't provide us energy, but they support the function of those macronutrients. So they break down the metabolism, and, some of them have really, really important roles, like iron and, oxygen around the body, and calcium and bone health, and magnesium and heart health and muscle contraction. So yeah, there's a few reasons why. Just all the colors, whatever you like. Preferably more of a focus on the veggies, because we need more of them. We need 5 serves. So, what I like to tell people is, when you're looking at your plate, try and have a third to a half a plate if we're thinking about lunch and dinner. And if you're a savory breakfast person or a smoothie person, if you can sneak like some spinach or something in there, win-win. And then from a fruit point of view, it's, 2 to 3 serves a day. So a serve is like a whole fruit, like an apple or a banana, or we're talking like 2 small nectarines, plums, small mandarins, that type of thing. So yeah, plenty of good reasons there.
I'm guilty as one of these individuals that loves their white and browns. But I try to offset with a smoothie. Is a smoothie a decent enough replacement to add all your colors and to mix those micronutrients? Is that enough of a replacement, or should this be mainly just trying to eat something that we can chew, like an organic type of salad or veggies?
No, look, again, progress over perfection. Like if you're having none and you can have a smoothie, and if you're making it and you're throwing it in, great. Preferably doing that rather than like buying, like a store-bought fruit juice, because one glass of fruit juice is about the same amount of sugar as, say, like 6 to 8 oranges. So it's like, we're probably never going to eat that. That's what happens when they take all the fiber out and process it. So, again, it's kind of like start line, finish line, and we don't go, the saying I always use in this context is, you never win a grand final on the day one of pre-season. It's, you train for a season, you have your pre-season, in-season, you need to qualify, etc. I don't know why in nutrition we just think we learn, we do. Like the more we approach it as like we're learning, we're training, we're coaching. And that's probably why I've even shifted. Like I remember I was like, oh, do I want to call myself a nutrition coach? Because like people can be calling themselves that and they're not necessarily qualified. And, I've done so many years of study and, really high level accreditation and all of that. But it's like, I think people get that notion. They get, I have a swimming coach, an athletics coach, a strength and conditioning coach. So I think they get that notion, and it paints the picture of like you're training yourself with this process.
That's definitely great. And just like you said earlier, just have that common sense, someone to bounce off and go, hey, wait a minute, you're doing good here, but maybe let's take this next step over here. And that bit of rationality and common sense can be actually kind of powerful. We can get in our head so much and we can get confused with what the next steps are. And especially with all the misinformation on nutrition, it is a minefield out there. So to have someone like yourself that has clarity and direction and can speak plainly can be amazingly impactful.
And I think as well, like someone who's not a saint, like not that it is about, again, it's not about being perfect. I don't subscribe to that. We've all got our biases. Big fan of a vino and some cheese, like that won't ever be going. But I'm also a huge fan of feeling my best, performing at my best, growing my business. I know we touched on at the start, like I've had some health issues this year from COVID, kind of post-COVID complications, and health is my highest value. And this has just even painted a picture even more clearly. But I've had to shift that more from energy conservation and considering work and what I take on, because I haven't been at my full health. So it's really is that individual, and more people can hear that positive messaging, but also from a realist. Like I think when people are too moderation, balance, it's like, okay, what does that actually mean? Where we can give some people some metrics, some tangibles, some strategies, and like I said, the key I find is multiple options. It's not just plan A. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. So they just get it, know it, do it, and they can repeat it.
It's awesome. I've got a really woohoo question for you, Jess. I've talked a lot of basic principles and I love it, and usable stuff that people can use. What do you reckon on a systemic level, like on an education level, on how we interact with society? What needs to be changed to thread the needle into better nutrition practices, principles, like a big woohoo, like large lens question?
I mean, it's been a long time since I've been at school, but I think what are we doing in that education system? For me, there was Healthy Harold. I can't really remember what else, but
I remember that.
And I guess it's, for me, nutrition education is two parts. It's knowing and it's doing. So how can we teach people that? And I guess, knowing that behaviors and so much of who we are is set in stone from 7 years or before. Like we're starting education later in the piece. And, yes, of course, should be, a responsibility of the family, but it should also be a responsibility of our government and our education system. So, can we look to start implementing and educating both that knowledge and that practical early on in school? And again, I haven't been at school in a long time, don't know a lot of teachers. If that's the case, apologies. But I'm sure it's still to the point, I don't know if they're engaging experts to then also create that curriculum. So, the thing with nutrition, and I wanted to add this to the energy point before, other than sleep and breathing, it's literally the only thing we do every single day, multiple times a day. So again, when you think about that compounding effect, so if we, not create robots and overthink every meal, but we just have this leveled up education and knowledge and people know how to apply that, and potentially look at, certain like subsidies or taxes that allow, low income earners to access foods that are actually, really healthy for them in areas when there's probably an abundance of foods that are not, that's actually probably going to move the needle so much more. Again, I'm not like easy to say, I'm sure very difficult to do, a lot of red tape to change kind of that big, government policy, education system, but that's the stuff which, would considerably move the needle rather than just a few voices chipping away at things.
I think a lot of it does come down to knowledge, because it is quite tricky. You go into your supermarket and you mentioned how you can eat like a yogurt pouch. Well, a yogurt pouch is an awesome example of something really healthy to pick up to get some protein in it. And these days, like, yogurt is getting better. It's like it's going back to kind of its roots a little bit more. There's stuff in less other things in it. And you can get a quick pouch and you can eat that, and it can be a fantastic addition to your daily nutrition. But then on the other side as well, there's so many other packaged things that are not going to be anywhere as good for you. And there's going to be the yogurts that sometimes you're going to pick up, and I'm sure you recommend certain types of yogurt pouches to people over others. But there's going to be certain things that you probably don't want to be picking up that are packaged, and there's going to be other packaged foods that's good. So what we see often is we see like a demonization of certain foods, right? Oh, don't eat any packaged. Well, who can afford their time to do that, right? Or even when it comes to fruits and vegetables, like don't eat fruits, like, and stuff like that. So it can be very hard for people to like organize themselves around all that information that's out there. Like whether it's like, oh, I shouldn't be eating packaged food, but packaged food might be the best thing for you at this moment in time to help you throughout your day, and so forth. And so like I've seen a few things that you've done on Instagram where you have kind of gone for a few things like that, and I think that's fantastic. I think more people need that kind of information of like, when you're navigating around the supermarket, this is a good option of yogurts or
totally. And the product guides that you've seen, so they're like inside my my online program, Eat Like the Elite. I'm actually about to make one of them available for free for people to download, because so many people wanted to get their hands on it. But even within that, exactly to your point, there's times where different options are actually better. So YoPro, Chobani, your higher protein options are more what I would call your everyday yogurt. So that's the one you want to add to your breakfast or your snacks. But then if we're talking about you've only got half an hour to an hour before training and you want to have a yogurt pouch, I'd actually prefer you have an option with less protein in it and more carbs, because that's going to digest and actually fuel your sessions. So, within some of those product guides, it kind of says like everyday snack, primer snack, because there are different scenarios. But to your point, like, that is not information people are talking about. That's very high level, and that's why I'm trying to really make it simple, and so people are educated on that. And it's really just not a message that is out there.
I want to jump on that periodization nutrition in a minute, but I want to go back to that education. I think this is so important, because I cannot remember as a young fella my parents ever explaining what food does to the body and why you would use certain foods to elicit certain responses. And it wasn't until like I'm probably a late teenager reading muscle mags going, ooh, protein, this is what this does. But I think it's an important thing, because at home, I've got 2 young kids, and trying to explain to them, like, these foods make you feel good, and these foods make you happy, and these foods might taste really good, but they're a sometimes thing. And starting that little education process, like within yourself, so you get a sound understanding, it's the best way to teach the next generation coming through to have good nutrition practices as well, because these are with you for life, and then they can spread that message as well, and hopefully have that butterfly effect with your nutrition and spreading out into the greater community and into society, hopefully.
Yeah, and even them having like a good understanding of how to navigate something being good or bad, or like you said, Jess, when it's good or bad. And I find it's so confusing. I'm that guy that when I go into a supermarket, I read the back of everything I buy. Well, I'm looking at the ingredients, and then I'm looking at the breakdown of carbs and fats. And just the other day, when a member just asked me for some advice, and I went in just to look at the pouches of yogurt, and I have my favorite anyway. It's got higher carbs, and I'm normally in the search for some more carbs. So I get like the Ziggies, and it's a little bit more like kind of like I like the raw sugar kind of thing, but never mind. But when I go in there, there's like 10 different pouches now, and they've all got completely up and down on the carbs and the protein. So it's really cool that you can say to someone in a way like, oh, before your training, have this type, and then after your training, you can have this type. That's pretty cool. That's a really good advantage that we have to the modern day.
100%. And, one thing that was mentioned before, like, my message on nutrition has become more simple over time. Like, the more I've learned, the more simple it's gotten. And I would say, like, the absolute most important nutrition lesson I think everyone can learn is it's essentially your macros and your micros, but I call it all the elements, which is essentially like there's 4 elements. And if you know what they are, which is carbs, fats, proteins, and colors, and you know what they do. So for carbs, I say they fuel your body and your mind. For proteins, I say that they're important in recovery, but also sustaining appetite and energy. For colors, I say they're about nourishing and vitality. And for healthy fats, I say we don't want to neglect them because they protect you. They're really, from an anti-inflammatory point of view. And if people just kind of have those keywords, fuel, sustain, nourish, when they start to kind of, have all the elements at meals and piece it together, they can start to understand why they feel a certain way. And then if they skip something because life, whatever, then that might kind of show them why that's the case. And again, that self-awareness piece I think is so important. But it doesn't have to be big, long, and winded. It's 4 elements. This is what they do, having an understanding about what they are. If everyone knew that, people would be in such a better place with their nutrition and know how to kind of pull a meal together. And I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed by time and this and that, but it's really what's in your house, what can you throw together, know that information, and you're sweet.
And most of the overwhelming comes from rubbish information out there, I reckon. Like it's information like saying certain things are like supreme, like that you must have pomegranates in your food, for example. And then there's 4 other things they have in their mind that must be in their food. And the simple approach is just going to calm people down a little bit and just allow them to be like, well, this is healthy. It doesn't have to be all the most trendy superfoods at this moment in time. It just has to be a well-balanced, like tick off them boxes. I love that.
Why is the superfood always so exotic? Why is it always found in somewhere hidden? And it seems to be like in the Indian mountains, in this lost trail somewhere, we found this super grass that does A, B, and C. It's always mystic. It's always got some woohoo behind it. It's boring. It's boring. It's just basic nutrition principles. They work so well. It's hard to put a sexy sell to it.
I know, which is why I think I've given up on trying to sexy sell it. I like I said, the trump card for me is what if you could learn how to do this, focus on it for a few weeks, and then cement that as a habit so you're just on autopilot and it's something you do. And thank goodness for Atomic Habits. I feel like it's putting this whole notion on people's radars, and you can apply it in every area of your life. But for me, I'm that's the trump card. But I feel like diet culture has a lot to answer, media has a lot to answer, and also people are probably only going to get to that point when they've tried a few things, maybe haven't found their rhythm, and then they kind of get to the oh yeah, so I probably should try this more sustainable approach, which is totally fine. You have to test and trial things, and I guess it's how you learn and you get onto a system that really works for you.
That's fantastic. I like the analogy of eat for what you're about to do or what you've just done. And I think that's something in a training sense, in our sense, if we're coming in for a decent gym session, you'd kind of premeditate. Maybe you might need some fuel for the session. I think we've already touched on it a couple of times, but you might be looking for some easy carbs to get into the system to energize you up before the session. Then afterwards, you might need to speed up that recovery with some extra carbs and protein. Would you would that be correct in your lens there,
Yeah,
Jess?
definitely. I think, the word periodized nutrition is really a fancy way of saying having a strategy and talking about adjusting certain nutrients or elements based on what you're doing. But to be honest, it's really talking about carbohydrates. The other 3 colors kind of adjust with carbohydrates. So when you dial them up in your plate, you probably dial the colors back. The protein should always be about the same. And, I think for most people, if they had a baseline framework, which is going to be different for everyone, but some people it might be 3 meals and 1 snack. Some people it might be 3 meals and 2 snacks. And then it's just those ratios might adjust if you're coming into a big afternoon session. One thing I am talking a lot about at the moment is what I call my fueling framework, which it's when you're training for performance. You're coming into a key session, those 4 hours before, we'll talk about morning trainers in a second, but, 4 hours out, you want to kind of switch into preparation mode. So it's like pre-training meal, pre-training snack, and a primer. So your meal is really like, if it's afternoon, it's just your lunch. And again, maybe that ratio of the carbohydrate is a little bit more than normal. Pre-training snack is something might be 1 to 2 hours out. And that still might be, that might be a piece of toast and a piece of fruit, or yogurt and some muesli, or depending on the person. And then the primer is the game changer. That's kind of something you have in that 30 minutes before, which is fast digesting. Primers I find a little bit controversial. Like, fast digesting often gets correlated with, very processed and sugary. And don't get me wrong, some foods in that category are a primer. But what I like to do is present people with options. So is fruit, so is dried fruit, so is lollies, so is a piece of toast with honey and jam, or pikelets, or rice cakes. So, people choose your poison type thing, or not even poison, I should say. People choose your primers. But yeah, having that fast kind of available carbohydrates without proteins, fats, and fiber, because those things slow a meal down. So day to day, we want slow digestion, because that means nice, even energy release. Before you train, if you've eaten something that's high fat, high protein, it's going to be in your stomach. You're going to feel very uncomfortable, and it's not going to be available for the session. And then, as you've touched on, recovery is important. 30 to 60 minutes, get those carbs in, get that protein in, get the colors in, but also it's not the be all and end all. Like, recovery really is a 24/7 process when you are training most days. So coming back to that principle of protein consistency, 24 to 48 hours after a session, we've got that elevated opportunity to recover. So meal and snack post, yes, important, but, one meal and snack versus a day or two's worth, it's, that thinking that big picture as well.
And with that, that's kind of your micro, your small lens, how you're eating for our day, and you working with athletes and general population as well, and like CEOs, like you said. Like, do you find that things have to change in the big scale as well? And what kind of changes normally do you make on that bigger scale? Like, you talk about a periodization or the strategy or plan, and how that's kind of like, this is what you're going to do day to day. This is what you do around your training. This is what you do around these like competition days or match days. Outside of that, what kind of changes do you normally make on a bigger scale?
Yeah, so I guess then it's looking at like other big rocks, like, or pillars of health, and how it feeds into that, and sleep. What are we doing in that space? How are you sleeping? Nutrition has a role in that, but sleep hygiene practices, like sleep and nutrition, again, they're the two things that we do so much of. So what are you doing there? Looking at those other kind of areas, like the gut health space, looking at those where the person's currently at from a diversity piece with their intake. Or I would always talk about, movement, sleep, and then, mindfulness, and I never go out of my scope. But if I've got someone who isn't, covering off all those areas, and they're wanting to, linking in with people that can help with that. So, that well-being and performance piece is so, interconnected that, it's looking at that as well. And I guess to your point, like, those principles for me really do apply to everyone, but obviously the volume is very different. Like, from an athlete versus someone who, say they're a corporate and they're training a couple of times a week, or if they're in a really busy phase and it's not training very much, those frameworks are still there, but yeah, maybe there's less snacks, or there's smaller meals, but we're still looking at those ratios, as opposed to someone who's very active or an athlete where the volumes are bigger, and then it's probably also, those snacks and primers and all of those things, there's a lot more of them in the mix.
And you talk about trackables as in like how people subjectively feel. Do you ever use any objective measures of gut health? Have you used any gut tests or anything like that?
Yeah, if someone is interested in that space, I'll refer them to Microba. So, if we're measuring gut health, it's sending off a sample. So you need to send off a sample, which they will analyse and send back on your microbiome and the makeup of all the different bacteria. And the cool thing about, I guess, your microbiome, it really is changing and evolving. Like, there's studies which have shown within a matter of a few days that environment shifts. And I guess that's, again, maybe on that external factor how people might be like judging themselves, maybe how they look, feel, clothes, etc. But on that internal factor, I'm not saying we're sending samples off every 5 days, but it's pretty cool to know that those changes are happening very, very quickly. And I believe you can do that kind of every 3, 6 or 12 months. So
and
yeah, that's
it must
what
be nice for yourself as well. Like you're implementing these gut strategies with people, and then they are testing their guts, and then like you said, you see it in 2 to 3 days. But how good is that for them to actually see, oh, my gut is, and my microbiome is getting healthier or bigger or larger or whatnot.
That's it, and it's kind of like gut health, I feel like, is the trump card to diet culture. It's becoming more of interest, people are hearing about it, it's really new and emerging. The last 5 to 10 years, like, have 80% of the research, and we're still only at the tip of the iceberg. And I guess, you know, the whole mental health, mental well-being space as well, and the correlation between that. So, you know, thankfully there's a lot more kind of positive information coming out about that, which is hopefully kind of softening. Again, I don't know, I'm so in it, it's sometimes hard to kind of see the shifts and the changes, but I do think people are becoming a little bit more aware. Doesn't mean that they don't fall kind of victim to the quick fixes, because, you know, we all do in probably different areas, but, you know, I think people are becoming more wiser and switched on, and I think gut health and mental well-being is a big reason for that.
I think that's such a good point, and you just saying that you're in it. Like we talk about this all the time, that we are in our bubble. As like we think that most people need this advanced information that we are searching for ourselves, like when we're educating ourselves on a day-to-day. But the truth is that outside of our bubble, most people don't actually know that much, and just need to be, again, like back to what you've said a few times, just need to be reminded of the basics, right? But then it's also nice for them to know, like, oh, we're eating for our gut for this reason. Like, this is why we're going to eat for the gut. I've seen this happen, and there's obviously backing it up with the research that's out at the moment. It's fantastic.
On that gut health, I think one of the things I've seen rise in the last couple of years is like gut supplements and gut booster supplements. Is that something you look at, or are you impacting changes mainly through just food decisions when you have a client trying to improve gut health?
Yeah, definitely preferably through food, like through looking at your plants. And again, it's not overcomplicating it. Like, I'm all about, okay, hacks, how can we switch some things? And it's even just little tips like, instead of brown rice, get a multi-rice, or instead of chickpeas, get 4-bean mix, or, you know, whenever there's a multi, instead of almonds, get mixed nuts. You know, all of those little tips, like, work. But, you know, and probiotics, I guess, get a really big focus. But if anything, the prebiotics are actually the real kind of heroes, which prebiotics are naturally in, like, some high-fiber foods. You can get prebiotic fibers. I'm seeing a lot more products coming out with prebiotics in them. But look, prebiotics, probiotics, they're all good for you. But, you know, having a kombucha and having only 5 plants across the week, that's not, you know, kombucha's overriding that. So it's always a hierarchy. It's always like, you know, what's the base of the pyramid? And when it's the gut health pyramid, it's your 30 plants, it's your prebiotics, it's your probiotics on top.
I think one of the biggest misunderstandings of probiotics is that they go into your gut and then they sit there and then they live in your gut. When really all the evidence on probiotics, they haven't actually found a probiotic yet that can go in and actually change your gut, like from the inside out. It's more like a receiver of information, and the gut's kind of happy about it, and that builds positive gut bacteria. And then that's why I think that prebiotics are so important, for the reason that you're actually feeding the good gut bacteria.
Exactly. It's kind of like the whole, you know, your muscles love carbohydrates when exercising at a high intensity. Like, your good gut bugs love the prebiotics. That's their favorite fuel that they feast off. So by giving them more of that, they eat more of that and they multiply and produce more of each other. So, yeah, they're definitely the thing that should be getting spoken about more. And again, seeing products starting to add prebiotics is, you know, the food manufacturers catch on to things pretty quickly. But again, this is a good thing. So great, add away.
You just mentioned you try and get your clients maybe about like 30 plants. Do you get them to track that? Like, is that something they're gamifying in their week?
Yeah, I think gamifying it is the biggest win or that people can have there. So I normally just have like trackers. I haven't actually looked. There probably are apps out there, but getting them to count how many plants they're having in certain meals, like, you know, breakfast in the morning, is it just oats? And, you know, can we then add chia seeds and fruit and nuts? And toppers, and all of a sudden, like, it does, even I do this to myself sometimes, like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, how many plants? And if I've switched off, there might only be, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7, and then when I get really crafty, like, I think my record was 15 or 16, and I was like...
In 1 meal?
Yeah. And there'll be even like little salad toppers you can add where there's so many different options. So yeah, gamifying it is definitely the way to go there.
And you speak about we spoke about like knowledge and people getting understanding and being educated, and a lot of that's coming. It's getting dripped down. Like obviously you mentioned like government is really important. The individual like at schools is really important. But also it's like them big industries, right? That we know that most like cereals are all owned by 1 or 2 companies, and like likewise they're catching on, right? Like I'm a big believer of that you vote also with your dollar. Like so every time I go in and buy something healthier, like I'm actually then telling industry that I want healthy foods. And you talk about that, you like when if I thought of it when you mentioned rice, like now when you go to like the Uncle Ben's microwavable ready to go rices, you don't just get white rice and brown rice anymore. You now have them. You have like the quinoa, red rice, and black rice with white rice. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty cool. Like it's a nice way things are going, I reckon.
Definitely. I think people want it. Food manufacturers are kind of in some ways being forced to create products with it's more probably existing ones and modifying it, but people want it and people are becoming more knowledgeable. So yeah, and people are purchasing it. So obviously like manufacturers will create or continue to create where people are spending. So I like that concept as well. You're voting.
It must be kind of fun for you, and it must make your job a little bit easier. Would that be correct? Like that now you can kind of be like, oh, I'm in a rush. Well, the rush might have been, well, you're going to have to soak some lentils, and you're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to do this. It's going to take hours. You're going to have to prepare it. But now rush is go in, grab this rice. I've got a good option for this, and like must make your job easier.
Pre-sliced salads, yeah, it's like nearly sometimes it's like permission to choose that stuff, because it's like, oh, should I be getting the pre-sliced salads? And it's kind of like, well, what would you do instead of that? Oh, I'd order Uber Eats and get X, and it's like, okay, so again, what relative, like that voice of reason. So yeah,
while industry is getting better with that, Uber Eats is also on the other side of things. I forget about that.
Those bastards are so good, man. Like on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays, they start upping the alerts to you. So like I know you, man. You stay at home during these hours. Here's 3 alerts tonight. Do it, you fat bastard. Do it.
I swear, every time it took me so long before I used it, and like I use it from time to time, but what kills me is the delivery fee. It's never good. Yeah. And then I'm furious at myself. I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to cook every night, but why don't I go and order more like meals and have them in the freezer? So like whether they're ready made, whether they're partially made, and again, I fall victim to this at times, but that poor quality meal and that price tag just infuriates me. And I'm not doing. I think I deleted the app last time. I was like, never again.
You made the point earlier, Jess. Like dietitian, you got your strength coaches. Like people have these illusions that you live this this perfect life of training and balance and meditate and eat like a bloody guru. Man, it doesn't matter who you are. We're all humans. We all stuff up. We all enjoy having like cheeky foods. Like there's no perfection there ever. It's always trying to be better. But we have inconsistencies, and you like enjoying the nice things of life, and that is just being human. And no one should be living perfect 24/7. There should be peaks and troughs, but with the intention to try and better yourself long term.
That's it. I'm like, find your big rocks, like what works for you. And, for me, like I like to exercise most mornings, even if it's a walk, and I like to meditate and journal. So I try and do that as much as possible. But, there was probably a stage where I was like, oh, no, I feel so good. I've got to do all the things. And then like my morning routine was like probably COVID, like 3 hours when I had the time, but coming back into the real world. So that's not sustainable. Getting 1 or 2 of those, that's good enough. But yeah, nutrition is like, it's not just about, eating this food gives us this outcome. It's enjoyment, it's connection, it's social, and I would never want someone to get on this like wagon of eating to have more energy, feel better, but that to come at the cost of not living their best life in having fun and enjoying food and like missing social connection, which unfortunately it does swing the other way sometimes for some people.
So kind of the last couple of points where people kind of slipping off the plan. When people do slip off the plan, what's normally like your go-to? What's your protocol? What's kind of like, what do you reckon the best way around it is?
Yeah, sometimes it's nearly that reset. And I think the way I work with people now, it allows me to see when that happens. Like before, when it was more traditional model, book in, and when people would kind of cancel or push back, that was probably like, oh, something's probably going on there. And that's like when you actually need to get that accountability and reach out. But for me, it's, if someone's aiming to prepare meals most of the time, that's plan B. Who can we use? What can we leverage to kind of support that system? Can we use a HelloFresh or a Marley Spoon, or can we use a meal delivery service like a Dynamic or a, meals to, I don't know, can't even think, million different options. There's a few rattling through my head that I wouldn't recommend, but say Dynamic is a brand that I really quite like.
Who would you not recommend?
Oh, I don't know if I want to be that controversial. You
don't have to.
I'm not a big fan of My Muscle Chef. So,
They have boomed, haven't they?
Oh,
They're everywhere.
Is that, can I ask a reason?
I just look at some of the ingredients with the sauces. Like, I'm still wanting, when people are choosing ready-made meals, for it to be coming from, something that is close to what I would recommend. So, yeah, and also there's a lack of colours.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah. I personally, so I used Muscle Chef for a while, and I changed over to Dynamic because that's kind of what I was missing. I was kind of like the veggies were the ones that they said they had veggies in. I was like, there's no veggies.
It's like 3 beans here,
and it's green. Yeah, it's like the 3-4 green beans and a couple of peas. And I eventually looking at Dynamic, they're fantastic. Like the food is so fresh.
Yeah,
and it is. Yeah, and they actually put a fair bit of veggies in it. And you, I suppose that you're talking about the color and you're talking about veggie portions. Well, them two things can kind of be done wrong still if there's only a tiny bit of veggie on there. You still need you need quantity as well. You need something.
But and in saying that, I would still rather someone eat My Muscle Chef over McDonald's or KFC. So again, this hierarchy. But I think it's it doesn't mean if we're not cooking, then we're Uber Eats or we're takeaway, we've got no strategy. What is our strategy for when we need a bit of extra support? So for me, that's often the conversation. It's like, okay, I know you're making overnight oats in the morning, but can you just buy an oat muesli bar and a yogurt pouch to take with you? And it's really just kind of giving a deconstructed, convenient option to what they were doing, just to support them through busy phase, unmotivated phase, stressful phase, whatever it might be.
I think it's really kind of comforting to know as well what you mentioned a minute ago is that we touched on what the elite are eating, and then really it's not that hard for the general population or everyone is training to eat like that. It may be that the portion is changed, you may eat a little bit less, but really these days it's kind of like you can be eating like the elite. That's
exactly right. It's and it my program I called Eat Like the Elite because it's this is how the elite eat, but they're not eating the superfoods from Peru or from Amazonia.
It makes you feel, you kind of think they are though, don't you? You kind of
yeah. Look,
also because they do advertise it, they do get, obviously when you are the fastest runner in the world or whatnot, you will get called up by this famous superfood to then advertise it. So it does, advertisement does give people this kind of feeling that that's what's happening, right?
It must be the detox tea. It's the detox tea that makes them an athlete.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's purchase it.
I don't know.
Basic nutrition principles, they're absolutely beautiful. Jess, I got one. I think you've already answered it in it, but I would like to elaborate on it. And obviously saying you've spent a fair few years in the industry and you've simplified your message. Is that the advice you would give yourself to a young dietitian starting off? Or what advice would you give yourself starting off, to speed the process up?
I think it's just because nutrition's so important to you doesn't mean it is to the person that you're working with. So I think, when you finish, you want to give them all the knowledge, and for you it's your world because you've just spent tens of thousands of dollars and however many years studying it. But you have to remember, for other people, it's not that much of a high priority, and you also don't know what else is going on in their life. So the biggest thing is, yes, simplify, but listen to your client. And I think this is people that go through university in probably any profession, but who have never worked or don't have that great kind of rapport or relationship building skills, that nearly becomes first, because the client will kind of tell you directly or indirectly what they need, so you need to pick up on that and deliver. It's not what you want, it's what they want, and it's also factoring in their life and what is going to work for them. So I think the clinical skill set is the smallest part of the role. It's all that other stuff that comes first.
I think that applies into our field as well. It's so easy to go, everything I'm doing, they must do, and simplifying the message and go, hey, what's that lowest hanging fruit that this individual can go for to push them in the direction that they want to go.
Yeah, and it's also that kind of like that change of message where at first you want to learn everything and you want them to learn everything, and then later on you're like, oh, they only need to know this much, and they that's pretty all they want to know. They don't have the time for that. And also how important later on that you just realize that everything comes down to habits. It's like, well, at first it's kind of like, habits, that's not fun back at the earlier in my career, and then now it's like over time it's been like, wow, I need to figure out why people are doing these things wrong, because that's the biggest issue. It's just keeping them accountable and keeping it consistent.
100%. It's like, I used to think, well, people working with me, I've got to give them everything, I've got to do all of that, but it's like people are paying you to fast track. They just want A to B. They don't need the scenic tour, they just need the express route and something that will work. So yeah, it's a
nice way of putting it.
That is a really nice way. Like, you got to bite my tongue sometimes, because you're like, oh, you want to know, especially when someone expresses a little bit of interest, I'm like, oh, you want to know about all the nuance, all right, let's go. You just got to bite your tongue, go, all right, we've got some usable information, that's enough, let's move on.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're filling their head with as well. You might be giving them something that might be popping something out the other side. Yeah. Oh, totally.
You got any other lovely questions for Jess?
No, I think that's everything.
Awesome.
I know you wanted to mention that. You mentioned briefly the ebook that you have available.
So I've got a free fueling guide. So I kind of touched on that 3-step formula, like getting prepared to train, and being consistent with your nutrition is really key. But it's not about being a robot. It's just a framework. So I'll give the link to the boys, and you can get that from the show notes. Otherwise, my Instagram, I've got like a link in bio, Jess_Spendlove_dietitian. There's a lot of freebies and different bits and pieces in there.
Definitely check her out, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you, Jess. It's just been refreshing, to be honest. It's been such a fun chat to have, and you're a wealth of knowledge, and I really hope those that are listening to explore you and find out a bit more about you and use this information to level themselves up.
Love it. Thanks for having me. Love the chat.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jess. See you later, guys.